Hi, and welcome back to Assessing Achievement with the ELL in mind. In this module, we have covered in detail the aspects of both formative and summative assessment. In this video, we are going to take an in-depth look at the relationship between both formative and summative assessment of ELLs to better understand the ways in which both types of assessment interact with one another and the impact that this interaction, or lack thereof, has on our ELLs. Let's get started. Formative and summative assessment impacts ELLs much differently. The nature of formative assessment supports ELLs as it measures the process of learning, both content and language. It informs future teaching and learning so the ELLs can actually be a part of their own learning of both content and language development. It can illustrate areas where they might need additional support in either context. Formative assessment is flexible in its demonstration of learning, mostly due to the fact that it is teacher-created. The student can demonstrate what they have learned and mastered within the content in various ways, and not necessarily have to rely heavily on language in order to do so. Formative assessments provide an ongoing measurement of growth. The student is not necessarily assessed at the end of a course, but at various times throughout a course, which allows the observation of the growth of that particular student. Formative assessment mirrors classroom instruction. For an ELL, this is very important because it reflects how they are comfortable working and communicating within the content area. They can truly demonstrate knowledge learned without hindrance from language. For these reasons, formative assessment is a much more thorough way to assess the achievement of content and the development of language for ELLs. On the other hand, the nature of summative assessment often provides challenges for ELLs. More than likely, summative assessment offers little linguistic flexibility as they are often not teacher-created and are measured to a standard outside of the teacher's control. The assessment itself cannot be modified for language, and the student can therefore not demonstrate mastery of content without a solid foundation for the language found on the assessment. Another challenge of summative assessment is that it requires an undetermined amount of background and cultural knowledge, and is not sensitive to a student who may or may not have this cultural knowledge. If the teacher is not prepared to provide that knowledge before the test, it might be difficult for an ELL to do well on that assessment. Many times, this background knowledge would have been covered in earlier grade levels and/or learned through everyday interaction by a child growing up in a specific culture. Summative assessment is often restrained by time, therefore leaving the ELL little room to process language at their own pace. Summative assessments can also contain unfamiliar formats that the student may or may not have encountered in their prior educational experience or in the content classroom. And finally, summative assessment may not mirror classroom instruction, so would require a new and different set of language in order for an ELL to demonstrate content mastery. All of these challenges make it difficult to use summative assessments, especially more standardized tests, as an accurate measure of the ELL's ability within the content area. They must be supplemented by high-quality formative assessments. Formative assessment can, however, support summative assessment goals if the teacher provides quality feedback for both content and language during formative assessment. The student is able to use that feedback to strengthen their understanding of the content and therefore their performance on a final assessment. Formative assessment can also support summative assessment goals if the summative assessment parallels the formative assessment. When the test is in a format that the student has worked with before, the student's affective filters should be lowered, and therefore they are more likely to demonstrate an accurate ability within that content area. Formative assessment can also support summative assessment goals if it strengthens the content communication abilities of the ELLs. In other words, the student is using the language within the formative assessment and actually developing their language abilities in order to be able to successfully complete a summative assessment. And finally, formative assessment can support summative assessment goals if careful attention is paid to building background knowledge within the content area. Making sure your classroom resources provide a rich learning environment and that your ELLs have access to the appropriate background knowledge within the content area is essential to prepare ELLs to be able to demonstrate the content knowledge on any type of a test. In understanding the relationship between both types of assessment, we can begin thinking about how to use each to better support our ELL students as they navigate assessments of any kind in and out of the classroom.